I never imagined that I would find myself in a position to share this deeply personal story. My life took an unexpected turn that I truly did not foresee. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Melissa, and I am currently 45 years old. For quite some time, I have been a single mother, dedicated to raising my son all on my own. His name is Stephen, and he has now reached the age of 23. Throughout the years, we have maintained a close bond, just the two of us, navigating the twists and turns of life together, supporting one another through both the highs and lows. Then, one particular night, something quite surprising occurred. Stephen appeared to be extremely tired and mentioned that he wasn't feeling well. He had been putting in a lot of effort at work and studying diligently, and it was clear that he looked worn out. I suggested that he could lie down on my bed for a while if he wanted to take a moment to rest and recuperate. It was a particularly cold night, and our house took quite a while to warm up, so I decided to put a heavy blanket over him to help keep him warm. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal, just a caring mother assisting her son in feeling more comfortable. However, as I lay next to him, I suddenly felt him move a little closer to me. He must have been trying to get warm, and I didn't think too much of it at that moment. But then, unexpectedly, he wrapped his arms around me, gently pulling me close, much like he used to do when he was much younger. I was a bit taken aback by this gesture, but I chose to let it be, thinking that he probably just needed some comfort. I could feel his warmth next to me, and the rhythm of his steady breathing. As we lay there together, I noticed Stephen's breathing gradually slow down, as if he was drifting off to sleep. The room was so silent that I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in the stillness. It was uncanny, yet soothing in its own way. I remained still, not wanting to disturb him, convincing myself that it was simply a mother providing comfort to her son. However, after a little while, he shifted again, moving even closer to me beneath the blanket. I felt his arm wrap around me a bit tighter, and I froze for a moment, uncertain about what to think or do. Part of me wanted to say something or pull away, but another part of me remained still, captivated by the moment. There was a palpable tension in the air that I couldn't quite ignore, and I found myself puzzled as to why I felt this way. After that, something unexpected happened that took me completely by surprise. I felt something hard pressing against me under the blanket, and it was entirely unforeseen, causing my heart to start racing in response. I tried to remain calm and composed, reminding myself that he was just my son, and perhaps he didn't even realize what was happening himself. I lay there, attempting to ignore the complex feelings that were beginning to build up inside me. I reassured myself that it was merely a fleeting moment, just a strange and awkward situation that would eventually pass. However, as the minutes ticked by, I started to realize that things were indeed different, and I found myself at a loss for how to handle the situation. Stephen remained close to me, his breathing steady and rhythmic, but I could sense the warmth between us intensifying. I wanted to move, to say something light-hearted or humorous to break the tension that had settled around us, but the words simply wouldn't come to me. I felt trapped in that moment, caught in a whirlwind of emotions, unsure of what I was even feeling. Then Stephen adjusted his position slightly, raising his head to meet my eyes. There was a gentle expression in them that I hadn't noticed before, one that made me feel both secure and uneasy simultaneously. He remained silent, but his eyes seemed to question if everything was all right. I attempted a smile to dispel the odd sensation, but it only intensified the silence. Stephen's hands remained on my arm, warm and steady, providing an unexpected sense of comfort. I could feel his fingertips gently moving against my skin, almost absent-mindedly, as if he were lost in thought. It was such a small gesture, but every touch seemed to ignite something within me that I simply couldn't ignore. I focused on keeping my breathing steady, making a conscious effort not to let him see that my heart was racing uncontrollably beneath the surface. I found myself at a loss for what to do or say, so I just lay there, feeling completely enveloped in the strange and intense connection that seemed to be forming between us. I kept telling myself that this was simply a mother comforting her son, nothing more than that. Yet, in the quiet of the moment, with just the two of us tucked under the blanket, my mind was spinning with thoughts that felt wrong and inappropriate, yet I couldn't seem to push them away. He was my son, but lying there so close to him, I could feel something deeper emerging, a closeness that I struggled to understand. A mixture of confusion and warmth washed over me, creating an unexpected feeling that held me in place, making it hard to move or speak. Stephen didn't seem to notice my internal struggle at all. He just stayed beside me, his hand moving softly and reassuringly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to be this way. His breathing was calm and rhythmic, and I noticed that his eyes were closed again, leading me to wonder if he was drifting off to sleep. However, at that moment, my son's hand began to shift, gradually moving up my arm with a deliberate slowness. A chill coursed through me, and as if sensing the change, he opened his eyes wide, locking his gaze directly onto mine. In his expression, I could see a question lingering, as if he was silently asking whether this was acceptable, whether I felt the same peculiar pull that seemed to bind us together. I whispered his name softly, struggling to articulate the word, almost as if it were a fragile secret. Deep down, I wanted to halt this moment, to withdraw and establish some much-needed distance. Yet, somehow, my body felt paralyzed, unable to move away. The tension that hung between us was palpable, like a quiet storm brewing in the stillness surrounding us. Although neither of us uttered a single word, the air was thick with unspoken sentiments, emotions we both sensed but couldn't find the courage to express. Then, as if it were the most natural action in the world, he leaned in even closer. My heart raced, pounding in my chest, and my mind spun with conflicting thoughts, yet I found myself unable to pull back. I felt deeply conflicted, caught in the struggle between my identity as his mother and the strange, unsettling feelings that had suddenly emerged. As he drew nearer, I felt my breath hitch in my throat, and all rational thoughts faded into the background, leaving only that singular moment suspended in time between us. Now, Stephen's hand rested gently on my shoulder, his fingers lingering there as if he too was grappling with hesitation, unsure of what to do next. The world around us seemed to fade into the background, becoming distant and almost irrelevant, while my entire focus narrowed down to the warmth of his presence beside me. I could feel the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart, a sound I could almost hear if I concentrated hard enough. For a brief moment, I decided to calm the storm of emotions raging within me. I kept telling myself to take a step back, to create some space and break the closeness that felt both confusing and overwhelmingly intense. But then, unexpectedly, I felt his hand gently glide upwards, brushing a stray strand of hair away from my face. It was such a simple and tender gesture, yet it sent a wave of emotions through me, making my heart ache in ways I couldn't quite comprehend. When I finally opened my eyes, I found him there, gazing at me with such softness and an unmistakable sense of trust. End of preface. His face was so incredibly close that I could see every minute detail. The tiny freckles scattered across his cheeks, the gentle curve of his mouth that seemed to hold a secret, and the way his eyes searched mine with a depth that felt profound. There was a vulnerability in his expression that mirrored my own feelings, revealing that he too was just as lost in this moment as I was. We remained in that suspended state, enveloped in the quiet as if time had come to a standstill. My mind was a chaotic whirlwind, filled with questions, doubts, and thoughts I couldn't quite make sense of, yet my body felt rooted in place, unable to move. I felt an irresistible pull toward him, this person I had nurtured and raised, and yet, at that moment, he felt like someone entirely new to me. Just as I thought we might remain frozen in that silence forever, the world outside continued to spin on, oblivious to our stillness. Stephen gently pulled back, breaking the stillness that had wrapped around us. He looked away, almost shy, and let out a soft, nervous laugh as he rubbed the back of his neck, a familiar gesture that instantly brought me back to reality. At that moment, I realized just how incredibly close we'd been, and a sudden wave of awareness swept over me. I inhaled deeply, trying to steady my racing thoughts and calm the flood of emotions coursing through me, hoping he hadn't noticed my internal struggle. "Sorry, Mom," he muttered, his voice laced with uncertainty, the words carrying a weight I hadn't expected. "I didn't mean to make things weird." He deliberately avoided my gaze, and I could detect a faint flush spreading across his cheeks, as if he were grappling with the same confusing feelings that I was experiencing. I wanted to reassure him, to tell him that everything was okay, but the words wouldn't come. My throat felt tight, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I was struck by an uncomfortable awkwardness around my own son. It was an unfamiliar feeling, one I hadn't experienced in years, and it made the silence feel even heavier. I reached out instinctively, placing a hand gently on his shoulder, offering him a small, reassuring smile, hoping it would ease the tension between us. "It's all right, Stephen," I said softly, my voice calm and steady, though my heart was still racing. It's just been the two of us for so long. We're both probably just feeling a little lost right now." He nodded slowly, and I saw a brief flash of relief in his eyes, as though my words had somehow lifted a weight from his shoulders. But just as the tension began to dissipate, there was a brief, almost imperceptible pause, like a breath held in time, before either of us could say anything more. As the strain between us began to dissipate, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. The sudden sound jolted both of us back to reality, effectively breaking whatever spell had been woven in that moment. I quickly sprang to my feet, feeling my heart still racing from the intensity of our earlier interaction, and made my way to the door, grateful for this timely interruption. When I opened it, I was greeted by our neighbor Paul, who stood there with a friendly demeanor. Paul had always been someone I could rely on, a neighbor who was consistently helpful whenever I needed assistance. He flashed a smile, but I noticed that his eyes lingered on me a bit longer than usual, which made me acutely aware that I still carried the strange energy from my moment with Stephen. I tried to gather myself, hoping he wouldn't pick up on anything out of the ordinary. "Hey, Melissa," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "I thought I'd stop by and see if you needed anything. I know it's been getting a bit colder lately, and I can help with any heating issues you might be having." A strange wave of relief washed over me at his offer, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to relax. "Oh, thank you so much, Paul," I replied, returning his smile. "Actually, the house does tend to get a bit cold, especially at night. I'd really appreciate your help." Paul stepped inside, and I could feel Stephen watching us intently from the hallway, his expression unreadable and difficult to interpret. I glanced back at him, and for just a fleeting second, I caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, a flicker that resembled jealousy, though he quickly attempted to mask it. This unexpected reaction surprised me, leaving me to wonder if he was grappling with feelings that he was reluctant to admit, creating an even deeper layer of complexity in our already charged situation. And Paul moved around the room, checking the heater and ensuring everything was in good working order. He casually asked me questions about how things were going at home. We engaged in some small talk, but I found myself frequently glancing at Stephen, who remained quiet, watching us both with a strange intensity that made me uneasy. I could sense his discomfort, and it added a new layer of tension to the atmosphere in the room. I felt torn, caught in Melissa between wanting to ease the situation with Paul and being acutely aware of Stephen's presence, his gaze fixed on us without faltering. After a few minutes of this uneasy dynamic, Paul turned to me with a warm smile, attempting to lighten the mood. "All right. Everything looks good here, Melissa. Just call if you need any more help." I thanked him sincerely, and as he stepped out, I felt the tension between Stephen and me grow even thicker, almost palpable. I closed the door behind Paul, turning around to see Stephen still standing there, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his expression serious and unreadable. "Are you okay, Stephen?" I asked gently, trying to understand what was going through his mind at that moment. My son shrugged slightly, looking away as if he were trying to distance himself from the conversation, his voice quiet and subdued. "Yes, I'm fine. Just didn't expect Paul to stop by, that's all." I wanted so much to reach out to him, to bridge the gap that had suddenly formed between us, and to understand what was truly happening in his heart and mind. Nevertheless, just before I could gather my thoughts to say anything more, he walked past me, going straight to his room without uttering another word. The door shuttered down softly behind him, and I stood there, feeling a strange mixture of relief, confusion, and an unsettling sense of something left unfinished between us. I remained there, staring at Stephen's closed door, feeling an ache deep within me that I couldn't fully comprehend. My mind was swirling with everything that had just transpired, the closeness we had shared, the way his gaze had lingered on me when Paul was present, and the strange, unspoken tension that felt like it was just waiting to bubble up again at any moment. I eventually made my way to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, replaying everything in my mind like a movie. I knew I couldn't ignore these feelings forever, but I also wasn't entirely sure how to confront them. Just then, I heard a soft knock at my door, and my heart jumped a little, wondering if perhaps Stephen had come back to talk. "Come in," I said, trying my best to keep my voice steady and calm. Stephen opened the door and stepped inside, his face completely unreadable, revealing nothing of what he was feeling. He came over and sat down next to me, looking down at his hands as if they held all the answers. We sat there in silence for a moment, the air around us heavy with everything that had been left unsaid, creating a weight that felt almost tangible. "Mom," he ultimately started, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't really know what's going on. I'm sorry if I made things feel strange earlier. He trailed off, seeming to grapple with his thoughts and words, as if they were stuck somewhere inside him. I placed my hand on him, giving it a gentle squeeze to offer some comfort. "Stephen, it's okay. Maybe we're both feeling a little lost right now. It's been just the two of us for so long, and sometimes things can get a bit confusing." He nodded slowly, his gaze still focused on his hands, and then he looked up at me, his eyes reflecting a mix of emotions that I found difficult to interpret. "But it felt different," he said softly, almost as if he were afraid to admit this truth out loud. I didn't know how to respond to that revelation. I felt my own heartache with the same confusion he was expressing, and for a brief moment I considered reaching out to hug him, to reassure him that everything would be okay, but I hesitated, unsure if that was what he truly needed or if it would complicate things even further. So instead, I just sat there beside him, allowing the silence to speak volumes for both of us. Finally, after taking a deep breath to steady myself, I looked into his eyes and said gently, "Stephen, maybe we just need to take a step back and think about everything together." I paused for a moment before continuing. "It's okay to feel close, but it's also perfectly fine to need some space to sort through our thoughts and feelings." He nodded slowly, seeming to absorb my words. However, after that, in a surprising and unexpected move, He leaned his head against my shoulder, just like he used to do when he was much younger. It felt both comforting and familiar, yet there was that strange edge to the moment that I couldn't ignore. I felt my heart soften at the gesture, and instinctively I put my arm around him, pulling him close in a way that felt safe and reassuring, even though I knew that the questions lingering between us weren't fully answered. For the first time in what felt like a long while, I sensed that maybe we didn't have to have all the answers right now. We could take things one step at a time, figuring everything out together, even if the path was complex and unclear. As we sat there, simply holding on to each other, I felt a sense of calm wash over me, a quiet hope blossoming within, that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would find our way to surpass this together. We remained in that position, sitting quietly side by side, as if all the confusion between us could simply fade away just by being close to one another. Nevertheless, deep down, I understood that it wasn't that simple. The warmth between us was comforting yet unsettling, like a feeling simmering just beneath the surface that neither of us could fully ignore or address. After a while, Stephen lifted his head and looked at me, his expression serious and contemplative. "Mom, I don't know what to do with these feelings. I don't want to make things harder for us, but I can't just ignore it either." His words hung heavily in the air like a question he didn't dare to voice out loud. I swallowed hard, my mind racing as I searched for the right thing to say in response. But just as I opened my mouth to speak, there was another knock on the door. We both jumped slightly, startled by the unexpected interruption, and exchanged a glance, caught off guard by the sudden sound. The knock was firm and almost urgent, as if whoever was on the other side sensed that something important was happening. Feeling a sudden wave of anxiety, I stood up and walked to the door. When I opened it, Paul was there once again, his expression filled with concern. "Melissa, sorry to bother you. I just wanted to check if everything's okay. You seemed a bit off earlier," he said. I glanced back at Stephen, who was watching us intently, his face unreadable. I tried to steady my voice as I responded, "Thanks, Paul, but we're fine, just having a quiet evening." Paul's eyes shifted from me to Stephen, his expression thoughtful. "All right, but remember, I'm just next door if you need anything," he said before leaving. After closing the door, I went back to Stephen, my son, who was still looking at me with that same piercing stress. He stood up and began going slowly toward me, making my heart race all over again. The air between us was thick with all the things left unsaid, creating an almost palpable tension. Just as he reached me, he suddenly stopped, his expression shifting as if he were engaged in an internal battle with himself. Maybe we shouldn't push this, Mom," he said quietly, his voice trembling slightly with uncertainty. "Maybe we need some time to figure things out." I nodded in agreement, my heart aching with the same conflicted feelings that seemed to swirl around us. "You're right, Stephen. We both need to take a step back and think about everything. We shouldn't rush into this." He nodded as well, and we stood there together, close yet cautious, as if we were teetering on the edge of something significant that we couldn't fully control or understand. It felt like both an ending and a beginning at the same time, an emotional crossroads that we couldn't quite define. And as he turned and walked away to his room, I couldn't help but wonder what the future held for us. What would this mean for our relationship moving forward? If you'd like to hear the rest of our story and discover how this unfolds, please let us know in the comments below. Your thoughts and feedback would mean a lot to us. That's the wrap for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please give us a thumbs up and share it with your friends and family. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay current with all our future uploads. Take care and see you soon.